Okay, in terms of the stuff, the deadlines remain unchangified. So, exam 3, exam 4, quizzes part 4, deadline December 7th, day of the infamy, at end of day. Exam 5, deadlines at the end of the normal final. For the paper, the emergence deadline is Wednesday, 11th to 9th to 9 p.m. For full credit. Then there's also the desperation deadline, December 8th, for half credit. Before pressing on to our new stuff, namely on to part 4, anything about the previous stuff to be that needs more stuff. So part 4 is all about value theory. And value theory in philosophy, as we saw back in the ancient days of the early times, involves areas that deal with matters of value. And of course, value is a measure of worth, so it's aspects of philosophy that deal with things of worth. One obvious example, of course, is ethics, good and bad, right and wrong. Also includes aesthetics, which is the aesthetic value, beautiful, ugly. Also includes politics, which is all about values. And interesting enough, economics, weird as it sounds, is a branch of moral philosophy, because it deals with the value of economics. And that's where it originated, so it actually sticks in there. Don't tell the economists, though. They think that everybody works for them, but everybody is working for us. So we'll begin with ethics. The fundamental question is, what is ethics? And the basic idea in general is it deals with good and bad, right and wrong. Now, when it comes to moral philosophy and ethics, we have different, as we saw back in the ancient days, different levels. Now, one type is what's called descriptive ethics, which, as we saw before, is simply describing the ethics of particular people at a particular time in a particular place. And this is the sort of thing they do in sociology, anthropology, and history. So if someone says, for example, the moral views about racism in the United States in the 1860s was, it's simply describing it. There's not, in that case, there's no judgment if it's good or bad, but this is what these people thought then and there. And that's a good thing to do. History, psychology, sociology, etc., anthropology studies past moral systems, saying that's what people at that time in that place believed about good and bad. But if we just stuck with that, we wouldn't be doing moral philosophy. Moral philosophy goes beyond just saying, this is what people at a particular time and place believed about morality. It tries to address the question of what actually is good and bad, what actually is right and wrong. So moral philosophy is or ethics, and I kind of use them interchangeably, although some people get mad about that. It involves the systematic examination, consideration of the concepts and theories of right and wrong, and attempting to develop theories and principles that determine what is right and wrong, good and bad. And roughly put, ethics is all about determining that. Now, there are all kinds of classic moral problems and questions, and these can be split into various levels of abstraction. The most abstract is meta-ethics, which deals with the high-level, super-theoretical stuff, like literally what is goodness, what is badness. When you talk about this being good, this being bad, what is the foundation, if anything, of morality? To use a concrete illustration, some people base their morality on God. So the answer would be, what makes things good or bad? If a person believes in God, it could be God that does it. If a person doesn't like the God option, as we'll see, this is the option put forth by John Stuart Mill, that happiness, creating happiness, makes things good, and pain makes things bad. Now the next level, which is somewhat more concrete, is what's called normative ethics. And that deals with the standards, principles, and rules. So it's more down to earth, more concrete, but still fairly general. So this is a level at which we build our principles, our theories, our rules, depending on how we look at ethics, that decide for us what is wrong or right. So, sticking with the example of religious ethics, if someone says, what makes things good or bad, and their answer is God. In terms of what we should do, our principles and rules, a concrete example would be the Ten Commandments. Don't lie, don't kill, don't steal, don't get caught, that type of stuff. Now, the most concrete level, and the one we normally think about when it comes to ethics, is applied ethics. That's where we, amazingly enough, apply our principles, rules, etc., our normative ethics to particular cases. And again, this is what we normally think about when we think about ethics. So, to take a concrete example, one thing that scientists have been working on for quite some time has been synthetic meat, where they take, animal cells and grow them on, really like a vat. If you ever, had the basic science class where you have the little petri dishes, little agar, little jelly in them, and you grow like nasty stuff in them. In this case, they would grow the meats. And so one moral question is, applied ethics would be, is growing meats morally acceptable or not? Now, one way to do this would be, if you say what makes things good or bad, you might say happiness is good, suffering is bad. And then our rule would be, things that cause suffering are bad, things that make happiness are good. Now, applying this to the meats, you could argue it's morally better that if people just have to have meats, they eat this meat and not kill like cows or pigs or chickens, because this can't suffer. You may think it's kind of icky, but instead of animals being raised in rough conditions, this thing has no brain. It feels has no sensations. So you could argue morally through applied ethics, by applying the theory of utilitarianism, that that meat is morally okay.
Well, wouldn't that be different from the animal eater?
Yeah, but you could just get you wouldn't have to kill it. You just get some cells. In theory, you just go up and it's kind of like if you had blood tests. You go to the doctors and they're doing see how your lipids are and stuff. And they pull out some blood. That doesn't it's kind of hurts a little bit, but it's not doesn't hurt, doesn't kill you. And so the animal, they can take out like a little tissue sample, just like a biopsy, and then grow it. So the cow or pig, yeah, they get a little momentary, jab, but that's better than getting like their head chopped off or or something. And so those are the three levels. And again, some of the classic questions are what is good or bad, what are the correct moral rules, and then with applied ethics, you can take pretty much anything that people do, any policy, procedure, activity, and make it into a moral problem by sticking the words, is it morally okay to, and then put in that, like, is it morally okay to grow vat-grown meat? Is it morally okay to legalize marijuana? Is it morally okay to deny same-sex couples the right to purchase wedding cakes? Is it morally acceptable to impose voter ID laws? And you can put anything there. Is it morally okay to forget someone's birthday? So pretty much anything we do, you can put it in. So ethics is full of problems. Now, when we do ethics, one thing we do is, of course, focus our assessment on particular categories of things. To be more detailed and clearer, when we're saying, is this good or bad, we look at the action itself, we look at the consequences, we look at motives, and also character. So the action was the thing itself that was done good or bad? Now, moral theories generally tend to pick like one of these to really focus on. So, for example, we look at the ontology of the good friend, dead friend of Immanuel Kant. He's all about action. It's like action ethics. Is the action itself good or bad? There's also a focus on consequences. Once something is done, there are things that arise. There are consequences. And are those good or bad? Utilitarianism, as we'll see, focuses on consequences. That's what matters. There's also the question of motives. Why did the person or persons do what they did? And then there's a matter of character. What sort of person is the person doing it? Virtue ethics, which we won't look at, but they're the ones, it's an ethical theory put forth in detail first by our good dead friend Aristotle, and it's still popular today. Now, interestingly enough, these different types of assessment can have different, sort of evaluations. So the very same thing could have, be a good action with good consequences, good motives, and good character. Like someone who gives money to help out people in trouble, it helps them, they're motivated, say, from kindness, and they're a compassionate person. So it's all, they say, good. And then you get stuff that's terrible. Someone like murders people, terrible consequences, their motives are they're psychopaths, and their character is they're evil, so all bad. Kind of the more complicated cases, though, are when you have a blend. So you could have, for example, a good action with good consequences done by someone for all the wrong reasons, and someone of terrible character, where they end up doing good, despite that.
Did you say like motives and intentions are two different things?
They can be similar, because motive is why you do it, and intention is in part what you're hoping to, what you hope will result. But your intention could be a motive. But yeah, good question, because motive is like, why am I motivated to do it? And the intention is, what am I hoping to achieve? And a person could have good, they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and also butter. But a person could have, different motivations different from their intent. So they could intend to do something, perhaps good, but have bad motives, or good motives, and, well, it's rare that you have good motives and bad intent. So it would be an example of, good action, good consequences, but bad motives and character. Well, take the following scenario. Suppose you have someone who is, let's give them a bad character. They're super greedy, like they're greedy to the point that everything else, they're willing to do horrible things just to get more doodage. But they're also super racist, super sexist. So, bad person. And their motive is, their dominating motive is just sheer greed, doing whatever it takes to get money no matter what. Now, weirdly, that terrible motive and that bad character could lead them to do very good things. How so? Well, imagine they own a company in the United States. Now, if you have someone who really wants to make tons of money, but they're also like racist and sexist, etc., what happens to their company if they do all kinds of racist, sexist stuff? Yeah, they get sued like lots, and then they lose their company. So someone who's super greedy, but also racist and sexist, would not do that stuff. They would have very enlightened hiring policies because they want to get lots of money. And this would have good consequences because they would hire qualified people regardless of gender, ethnicity, etc. And so for all the wrong reasons, a terrible person could do very good things. You can, of course, also have people who have, going back to the road to hell, being paved with good intentions and butter. A person could have good motives and good character, but end up doing something terrible. Trying to do something good, which ends up having horrible unintended consequences. I mean, the most, really sort of fictional, but examples of this would be like in the classic, sci-fi movies. You have a scientist who's just trying to do like some great thing, like cure cancer, or I'm like Deep Blue. Here's some movie, Deep Blue Sea, the shark when Samuel Jackson gets sharked. They're trying to cure Alzheimer's, but the end result is they make these like murder sharks that murder Samuel Jackson, which is a terrible, terrible thing. Another sci-fi, like someone's trying to build, make like some vaccine to, like Planet of the Apes, trying to help people, and ends up, wiping out pretty much everybody. Now, real examples, of course, aren't as extreme, but they're similar. Often in medical cases, some just try, like, for example, when they were trying to come up with a vaccine for polio, good motive, good character, when they were, as part of the process, they actually gave some people polio. And so, terrible. But you wouldn't say that they were evil people. Yeah, so when I look at looking at ethics, we look at, is the action itself good or bad? Are the consequences good or bad? And why is it being done? Because in general, if someone has a good motive, we tend to be more forgiving. Like if someone is stealing bread in order to feed their family who's starving, we would tend to, if we have a heart, we see them as less bad than someone who's just stealing to be awful, to hate, just to steal for the sake of stealing. And we generally, if someone's a good person, and they do something bad in unusual circumstances, like stealing to help their family, then we tend to be more forgiving than someone who's just terrible, doing terrible things for terrible reasons. So how do we, if we use these as the things to assess, then how do we keep score? What's the point system? Well, in every measure of value, we use value. And where we differ is the particular things we use as the points. To be more coherent, value, generically put, is a measure of worth. So that's our scoring system. Now, all normative fields dealing with norms, are value areas because they involve the two types of value, positive and negative. Positive, of course, is generally seen as the desirable stuff. The negative is the bad stuff. For example, in economics, if you're running a business, positive value is making money, and negative value is you're losing. When it comes to art, positive is usually beauty, negative is ugliness. When it comes to ethics, positive is good, and negative is evil. And so those are the two polarities of ethics, plus, minus. Now there's also one other complication. We also split value into extrinsic and intrinsic. Extrinsic value, this is value that is derived from something external to the thing. The basic idea is this. Something as extrinsic value means it is valued because it has a use to which it can be put. It's valuable because it is a means to some other end. So the value is not internal. Intrinsic value means that it's inherently valuable in and of itself. It's not valuable because we value it. We are supposed to value it because it's valuable. And if we don't value something with intrinsic value, we're getting it wrong. With extrinsic value, it's just that it's valuable because we value it. If we stop valuing it, then it doesn't have value. Now, extrinsic value, everyone believes in that because these are things that are crudely put useful. They're valuable because we value them. So, for example, money. Money is worth why? Well, yeah, how does it work? You go to a store, you hand them pieces of paper with numbers on them, or swipe a card. Why do they give you stuff in return? Well, because everyone agrees that that's how we keep track of points. We all say, okay, that crumply paper has worth. So if you give someone, a crumpled piece of greenish paper with a 10 on it, you get, $10 worth of stuff. They give you burger and fries, for example. And it's valuable because we believe it's valuable. Now, if you have a case, we could use a fictional example. If you have the zombie apocalypse, how much is money worth?
Zero.
Yeah, zero, because it doesn't have any intrinsic value. It loses its value because people don't exchange it anymore. And this happens in the real world, not zombie apocalypses, but currency becoming valueless. So, for example, during the Civil War, the Southern currency, Confederate dollars, were being devalued, and at the end they were valueless. And right now they're worth something as collector's piece items, but they have no cash value themselves. You couldn't go and I mean, people are probably willing to accept them for a hamburger because they're worth a lot of money, but you can't buy stuff with it because it's not valued as currency anymore. So money has extrinsic value. Now,
Would it be the same thing as like, I don't know how people say like, for $1 you used to get so
Yeah.
much more than you can now? Is that like kind of the same thing?
yeah, because if it just had value in of itself, then, in theory, it would always be, you think it would always be kind of fixed. It's always worth that. It'd be like, like a magical, I guess if you had a magical currency, you can always exchange for anything. The reason why you can buy less of dollars is because of inflation. Because it's worth, money becomes intentionally worth less over time. So that's why if we compare prices then with prices now, it's not going to be accurate. You probably heard old people say, when I was a kid, I could get this for like $1. But of course, the minimum wage back then was like $3. So people, money was, in a way, was worth more, but stuff cost less, because stuff costs less. Now, stuff costs more, but you have more money, because the minimum wage is higher. Although, with the minimum wage, it's actually worth less. You get more dollars, but those dollars buy less stuff. So minimum wage back in 1985 bought more 1985 stuff than minimum wage would buy today and today's stuff. Yeah, money's it's all magic. Now, sometimes people are surprised to learn that things like gold and diamonds also just have extrinsic value, because they often say, like, doom predictors and doomsday preppers will say things like, have gold, because it'll still be worth something. Well, I mean, on one hand, gold isn't tied to any particular country. People don't print gold; you just have metal. But gold is only worth something when people value it. If someone doesn't value gold, it doesn't have any value. Again, like after the zombie apocalypse, someone says, I got lots of gold. Well, it's only worth something if people want the gold. Intrinsic value is tougher, because intrinsic value means its value doesn't come from us valuing it, and if we don't value it, we would be mistaken that it has value in and of itself. Now, on one hand, that seems like not impossible, but really kind of implausible. Because when you think of like why we value stuff or what things are valued, we always do so for like a reason. Because you can get stuff with it, or like with food, you don't die if you get food. Well, eventually you die, but it keeps you from dying for a while. So what would have intrinsic value that you would have to value even if you didn't have a use for it? And that's kind of tough. Now, people have proposed a few things. One thing people have proposed is, well, one example is in the case of love. Now, deep down in our secret souls, do we want to be loved because of our car, our money, how good we look in a bathing suit, or do we want to be loved for who we truly are? Yeah, because you can lose your money and time and gravity are mean. So as Donald Trump's wife has found out, as time goes by, and also Bill Clinton's wife found out, as time goes by, things get worse for them. Yeah, so we want to be loved for who we are intrinsically, not because we're useful or pretty or rich, but simply for that we are lovable. Another thing that people often put forth as wanting to have intrinsic value are things like, friendship, or being like people. That people are valuable not because they're useful as things, but because humans have intrinsic worth, and they're often put forth. Now that's awful tough to argue for. Intrinsic value is easy. All you got to say is, yeah, people value it, so it's got value. Intrinsic value is you got to show that even if people didn't value it, they'd be wrong. That so if people have intrinsic value, people who don't value that, who treat people like things and not people, they're wrong. They're not getting things right.
So, like, in the example with friendship, they would have to argue basically what somebody's life would look like with friends versus somebody who doesn't value friendship and like what their life is without friends?
Well, and that would be more of like an intrinsic thing, to say that, well, if you look at it in terms of getting stuff out of it, like if someone said I'm friends with people because I can use them, that would be extrinsic. But if you said that, yeah, if your life would have more worth with friendship than without, yeah, then you'd say they would have intrinsic value, not because you're using your friends to get stuff, but because they are valuable in and of themselves. Yeah, so crudely put, it's the question of, are things valuable just because they're useful to us, that we can exploit them and use them, or are some things just valuable and we should respect their value? And people are probably the most important thing here, or non-thing. Because if we see people just as an extrinsic value, they're just things to be used. If we see people as having intrinsic value, then we're obligated to respect them as having value, even if we can't use them or exploit them. This is like nice people, not so nice people. Now, people have been ethicking, to use a word that's not a word, for quite some time. And over these long centuries of ethicking, there's this developed what I like to call the spectrum of morality. And the spectrum, as far as I know, includes all possible views. Now, one of the basic questions or problems in ethics is this. It's about whether morality is something objective or not. And every moral view, every moral theory on that question fits somewhere in this spectrum. And I claim that it's all inclusive because in a way I kind of cheat by including, there's like all things on the table than anything on the table. So it's trying to answer the question, is morality objective or not? So we'll begin with the most extreme view on one end, what's called moral absolutism. Moral absolutism has got two main features. First, if someone is a moral absolutist, they do believe morality is objective, as opposed to subjective. What's the difference? Well, the difference is this. Objective qualities are what they are, regardless of how we think or feel about them. A good example, non-controversial example, would be something like mass or temperature. It's not 71 degrees because I feel like it's 71 degrees. It is or isn't. Subjective things, they are based on how you think or feel about it. So for example, temperature is subjective, but whether it's warm or cool to you is subjective. So to one person, 70 may be warm, to another person, cool, because people respond differently to temperature. Now, if you believe morality is objective, that would be like looking at morality kind of like temperature, that people can have different feels about it, but something that is good as a matter of fact, or if it's bad as a matter of fact. So the absolutist is an objectivist about ethics. Morality is not subjective. What is good, not good for me, not good for you, but just good. And what is bad is bad. The second and most critical part is the absolutism. And this involves the following stuff. First, for the absolutist, there is one and only one correct solution to any moral problem, the correct solution. Secondly, since it's absolute, there are no exceptions. Now, this is both the appeal and the repelling part of absolutism. Because on the plus side, for those who like no exceptions in this absolutism, it's appealing. So to illustrate, for an absolutist, if something is wrong, it's always wrong, no matter what. So if lying is wrong, lying is always wrong, no exceptions. Now, again, for people like absolutes, appealing. But of course, when you think about it, is that true? Is lying always wrong? So you should never lie, no matter what. Well, intuitively, most people would say, no, it's not always wrong. I mean, it's less preferable. I mean, if but we'd probably say intuitively it's not always wrong with no exceptions. So suppose you want to keep the objectivity. You want to say, yeah, things are good or bad, not based on our opinions or feels or thoughts about them. Things are objectively good or bad. But you don't want to be an absolutist. Well, then you could accept Subjectivism of this type, in which morality is objective. It's not just opinion or subjective, but it's not absolute. So exceptions would be allowed. For example, well, absolutism, to give the philosophers an absolutist, Immanuel Kant, as we'll see. No exceptions. Lying is wrong, always wrong, no exception. John Stuart Mill believes in objective morality. He doesn't think it's just opinion, but he allows exceptions. For example, with lying, the idea would be lying is generally not good, but if the consequence of not lying would be terrible, then you lie. And the usual example is this. During World War II, the Nazis take over France. Some French citizens are hiding Jewish people in their basement. The Nazis come by and say, knock, knock, we're here to round up the Jews and kill them. Do you happen to have any Jews we can murder? And if the French person says, no, we wouldn't say those terrible, terrible French people, because it would be, well, although lying is generally not good, lying to Nazis is okay, because of that exception. So objectivism allows us to still be objective. Things are good or bad, but allow exceptions. So lying is generally wrong, but not always wrong. And that's fairly appealing, because most people, they want exceptions. Because they recognize, yeah, you probably shouldn't lie all the time, but there are cases where it would be okay. Now what if you look at that and say, even that's too much? Or if you look around the world, in the 7 seas, and you notice that people have different moral views. Even if you just go in like one classroom, or like with Thanksgiving coming up. One way to get things going is bring up a really, really controversial moral issue. Really fire that turkey dinner up. Especially if like vegan relatives, you can really get it going by like biting into the turkey. Especially if it's all vegan stuff and you bring in a turkey. But anyways, yeah, don't do that unless you want to. So what people notice is, of course, people have different moral views, and the moral view that morality is relative, not surprisingly, is called relativism. Now, moral relativism works like this. It's kind of like the way the law works. So, using the analogy, suppose we have 2 states. And suppose in this state, fireworks are illegal, so no, and here they're legal. So suppose you get a road, and someone's here, and they buy a bunch of fireworks in their car. What they're doing there is perfectly legal. They're like, load the truck up with all the fireworks. And they drive across the border. Nothing about them, the truck, or the fireworks have changed, but as soon as they cross that border, they're now criminals, because they possess illegal goods. Now if they see the police here and go, crap, and whoa, back across the border, they can stand there on the border setting off fireworks in front of the police, and as long as, this place has law that says it's okay, there's nothing they can legally do. But if they like stumble and fall across the line, they're done, because now it's illegal. And there are a lot of laws like that, which is why whenever you travel around the U.S., there's some pretty surprising laws. So it's good to know what the laws are before you go places. I mean, in most cases, they don't enforce like the ones from the colonial era about like having
crazy.
Yeah, and they just get on the books. They just never come off. And they generally don't, like the laws about ice cream being legal. They usually don't enforce those typically. Yeah, so with law, it all depends on where you are. Legality is where you are. Now, for the relativists, that's how morality works. So morality is set by whatever that particular culture at that time and place accepts as right. So when in Rome, what the Romans do is right. Now in that case, suppose you have 2 cultures. One says that it's acceptable for a woman to drive, and one says no. So if a woman is driving a car, here she's driving ethically, because her culture accepts it's more okay. But if she crosses the border into a culture that doesn't allow it, then suddenly she's driving immoral, even though nothing about her or the car has changed, because this culture says that it's wrong. So the relativist, wherever you go, whatever culture controls that area, that sets the morality. Now the reason why people like that view is because, well, it seems to match the perceived facts, namely that when you go to different places, people have different moral views, different times and places. Also, people have argued that it seems to create tolerance, because if you're a relativist, you say, well, in a way you say everybody's right, so nobody's wrong. Who am I to judge other people? Now, the unfortunate thing about relativism is there's a pretty good argument that shows you can't be a relativist, because it's a position that if you try to hold on to it, it's like trying to hold on to like an armful of sand. You know, it's like scoop a whole bunch of dry sand and try to hold it. It's not going to work. So why doesn't it seem to work? Well, the problem rests with the fact that culture is basically sand, in the sense that if you're trying to define it, you end up getting smaller and smaller cultures, kind of like one of those Russian nesting dolls, you know, like smaller and smaller ones in it. To illustrate, take some of the United States, and we take the moral issue of abortion. Now, most Americans say abortion should be legal, so that it's, they might not say it's morally good, but they say it's morally tolerable. So abortion then would be moral in the U.S. But if someone's Catholic, the Catholic Church says, yeah, no. So which culture do they go with, like American Catholics? And they may be, you know, the Catholic Church may say abortion is not okay, but their views say in their diocese might be it's okay. So then they're in like these three cultures. And so the problem is, where do you draw like the culture line? And of course, the individual, what about their own views? Why can't there be a culture of one person? Because there's no like middle number on a culture. Because you could have, as it's happened, you could have like a whole group of people and they get down to like one. But it's still, the culture is still the culture, there's just one person who's got it. So the problem is there's no way to say, hey, that's not a culture, every one of us can have our own culture of one. Which means, in a way, there's really no relativism, because you end up with, well, sliding into subjectivism. And subjectivism is the view that, in the case of morality, is that morality doesn't depend on your culture, it depends on you. So whatever you think is good, and whatever you think is bad. Now the appeal is that, well, there's no reason why you can't have a culture of one, so that's subjectivism. Now to use an analogy, if relativism is like law, where you have like a law for an area, and when you go in the area you're subject to it, subjectivism is like taste in food. Now, we can use the example of ice cream. What is the truly best flavor of ice cream? Yeah, the answer is the flavor you like, because it being the best means you like it the most. And everybody is right, because, well, they could be wrong about, like, they may think they like one, it's not really their favorite, because they're confused about flavors. But for every person, the best ice cream is the best ice cream for them. Everybody is right. Now, in the case of ice cream, that's fine. But in the case of morality, it's kind of like with the law. If everybody is right about ethics, ethics is kind of useless. Because, well, think about law. Suppose everyone can make their own laws about speed and how fast they can go and what they can own and so forth. Well, law would be useless, because no one in their right mind would ever say, yeah, what I'm doing is legal. They'd say, yeah, it's legal. Whatever I do is legal. Save a lot of money on prisons, I suppose, and law enforcement. So subjectivism ends up in that problem of, in a way, it's also kind of impossible. So relativism seems to slide to subjectivism, because if you just go by the culture, you could have a culture of one, which is subjectivism, but then subjectivism really can't hang in there either. Why? Well, it seems to slide into what's called moral nihilism. Moral nihilism is a view that morality, the moral words of morality, good and bad, right and wrong, are talking about nothing. Moral nihilists, to use an analogy, moral nihilists are to ethics what atheists are to religion. Atheists don't deny that there are churches. They don't deny that there are religions. They don't deny that there are, religious books. They just say when people talk about God, they're talking about nothing. And moral nihilists, they don't deny that there are ethics books. They don't deny that people go around saying good and evil. What they say is when people say good and evil, they're talking about nothing. It's like talking about unicorns and pixie dust. There are words for it, but it's meaningless. So the moral nihilist says there really is no good, there is no evil, there's no meaning to these, real meaning to these terms. I mean, yeah, you can look it up in the dictionary, but there's nothing behind it. There is no good, there is no evil. Now, we tend to think of moral nihilist as being a terrible person, because we think of someone being amoral. But a moral nihilist, weirdly, could be super nice. They just don't believe that there's good and evil, but they can believe in nice. Although what's interesting is like known moral nihilists are super nice, because they think it's actually wrong to have morality, because then, not only wrong, but you should be nice instead of good. And then of course people will say to them, but you're such a good person. Like, no, don't say that. For example, in Taoism, Taoism's a form, in a way, moral nihilism. They think, good and evil, you shouldn't talk about that, but you should, do things we normally consider to be like good, being kind, and so on. So those are the main options. Absolutism is, there's one correct answer to every moral problem, no exceptions. Objectivism, morality is objective, but not absolute. There are exceptions. Relativism, what is good depends on the culture. Subjectivism, what is good depends on the individual. And moral nihilism, talk about morality is talking about nothing. Now, the sort of off to the side is what's called moral skepticism, which is a view that you don't know. And this seems to cover all the options. One true view, no exceptions, all the way down to talking about nothing, and I don't know. And every moral view, every moral theory can be stuck somewhere within this spectrum. Now, relativism became like super popular in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and it's still kind of popular today. Like if you say to people like, hey, is there objective morality? Or should just, people be allowed to think what they want? Most people will say, oh, you can think what you want. Then you say, well, should people be allowed to murder you with a chainsaw? People are like, whoa, no. And so when people are pushed, especially with chainsaws, they start pushing towards objectivism. So it's kind of in the abstract, people should be able to do what they want, think what they want, unless it involves chainsaw me, then no. And so we can't assume that any particular view is just correct. We can't just say, okay, relativism is correct or objectivism is correct, because all these positions are legitimate philosophical positions. And so we have to argue for them, which is fair to everybody. So anyone who says, morality is absolute or subjective, they just can't assume it, they got to prove it. And if they're right and they have reasons, they can offer them. If they got no reasons, you have no reason to believe them. Now, as I mentioned, ethics is but one of many normative areas. Now, for each normative area, since it's normative, there's the term for each one, terms of value, plus and minus. There, of course, is the question of the basis or foundation, what grounds the plus or minus. And of course, since it's all about norms, it's all about judging, there's a question of rewards and punishment. Now with ethics, the answers are, well, the answer of the terms is easy. For value, positive is good, negative is evil. The basis of morality, well, that depends on what theory. Somebody will put in God, somebody will put in happiness, somebody will put in, human nature. And so every theorist has a different answer. Same with rewards and punishments. Depending on who you talk to, for example, Aristotle and other virtue theorists argue that if you are virtuous, you'll be happy. And if you're not virtuous, you'll be unhappy. But different theories give different rewards and punishments. Now, a close relative of ethics is religion. Now, the terms for religion's values is also straightforward. There, on the positive side, there's holiness, righteousness, sacredness, piety. On the minus side, you've got sin, blasphemy, heresy. That's easy. Words are easy. The basis, though, well, for people who believe in the religion, the basis is reality. So if someone believes in God, the basis of their religion is God. If someone's an atheist, they may say, well, religion is just psychology. They might refer to it as Sigmund Freud, for example. Say it's all this need to have a father figure. And so the basis of religion, again, depends on what you believe. Reward and punishment, well, again, depends on where reality is. Most religions have a bad place, New Jersey, and a good place, Maine. Sorry, New Jersey. We can't all be good places. If religion hasn't got things right, then all the rewards and punishments are here. Having a good feeling, living longer maybe, or being like stoned to death or something for heresy. Now, religion and ethics do kind of compete and sometimes work together. And one of the questions here is, can you go from what's in the religion to what's ethical? For example, to give a concrete practical example, in the United States, in most places, there are people who want to say that what's good or bad is set by religion. So they want to just go from in my religion to this is good or bad. Now the problem with that, of course, is it's too quick. Because just because something's in a religion, that doesn't entail automatically that it's therefore good or bad. One obvious practical thing is not everyone agrees about religion, and there is the theoretical problem. Does the fact that something's in religion, does that automatically make it good or bad? And many thinkers, even religious thinkers, like Thomas Aquinas, etc., have argued that you can't just go from it's in my religion to it's morally good, or it's not allowed by my religion, so it's morally bad. Law and rules. Now law, the value terms again, super easy. Legal, illegal. Also the negative, crimes, etc. The basis for law, on one hand, it's pretty easy. We just make that crap up. You just have some people go in some building, or rather companies, sending them something like here's some money, and make this thing up. So the basis on one hand is pretty straightforward. We make that crap up. But behind that, there's the question of, is there more to it than just we make this crap up? So can we talk about good laws and bad laws? Now, not surprisingly, people connect this to religion and ethics. There are those who say we should base our laws on religion. Sarah Palin, the great political philosopher, she made that argument. Al-Qaeda and ISIS, the Taliban, have the same view. You should base your laws on your religion. Now, the problem with that, of course, is not everyone has the same religion, and the question is which religion has got it right. I mean, it makes sense if God is real and God wants us to do stuff, or not do stuff, then it makes sense to make that the law. But everyone disagrees about which one got it right. I mean, everyone has their own answer. Their religion is right, but which one is the one true view? Again, mine, but everyone has a different view. Now, when it comes to ethics, similar thing. We often want to make our laws, good, and we want to think that there can be, bad laws. But there's also a problem there as well. So if we say, let's build our laws based on ethics, well, not all things that are morally bad seem suitable for law. For example, if someone is, cheats on their girlfriend or boyfriend, wrong. But we probably don't want the police arresting people. Maybe they do, you know, taser Colin, the police tasered him a few times. Bad. And so that's one of the problems there. Rewards and punishment in law, pretty straightforward. Few rewards, mostly just a whole bunch of punishments. You know, jail, fines, death. Okay, so have a good Thanksgiving. I'll see you on the Monday if you survive the challenge of the turkeys, or the tofurkeys, or whatever it is.